Hi, this is Mia Mass. I'm a professor of film at Vassar College, where I teach African American cinema, documentary history, theory and criticism, and a range of genre courses. But I'm really excited to tell you about my new book, Black Rodeo, which is a history of the African American Western. And it covers a range of films, from Sergeant Rutledge all the way through to Django Unchained and beyond. So why don't we get started? The Western is easily the most impactful American film genre. First of all, it's the genre most intimately linked with our national history. It's also the genre that has been most involved in the mythologization of that history, the kind of embellishment and rewriting and reimagining of that history. It's also the genre most linked to this notion of manifest destiny, the idea that certain people, certain groups of people were entitled to move in, settle, and claim the land as their own. But all of those sort of social and sociological reasons aside, it's also an important genre because it's the one most linked to other genres. So when we're talking about the Western genre, we're really talking about the reinterpretation of history into cinematic myth. Dominant history is really told by those who are in power and those who've had the military prowess or military might to displace native peoples, to enact laws, or maybe even to conscript former slaves, formerly enslaved persons, into service in the American cavalry. So when we're looking at the Western genre, we want to think about that backdrop and that history that's been turned into mythology. So there were some early notable Black cowboys. Chief among them was Bill Pickett. And Bill Pickett was an early rodeo and trick rider who rode in the Miller Brothers traveling rodeo. He appeared in early silent films and on what we call actualities, but he was also in feature films. He was in a film titled The Bulldogger and in a film titled The Crimson Skull. And so he was one of the first to be featured in what we would now call early Westerns. And beyond him, we might think of somebody like Nat Love, who was another important sort of rustler, cattle rustler, and cattle driver, trick rider, known in various territories from Tennessee to Kansas and beyond. There were some early movies and filmmakers that really helped to get the movement of Black filmmaking started. Chief among them was Oscar Micheaux. And Oscar Micheaux was a maverick filmmaker who started making films in the silent era, and he made films from the teens all the way through the 1950s. Two of his films that stand out are The Homesteader and Within Our Gates. But The Homesteader is what we might describe as an early Western, and he wasn't alone. There were folks like Spencer Williams or George and Noble Johnson. These were other African-American writers, actors, directors who were actively involved in making all-Black cast films in the teens and even into the 1930s and 40s. In addition to the Black filmmakers, you also had folks like Richard Kahn. And Richard Kahn made 3 all-Black cast Westerns, or directed 3 that we know about: Harlem Rides the Range, 2 Gunmen from Harlem, and The Bronze Buckaroo. And all 3 of these all-Black cast Westerns went on to be very successful with Black and white audiences. These films fought the erasure of African Americans and other people of color by incorporating African Americans into the central cast, into the not just the supporting players in the backdrop or the mise-en-scène, but actually the protagonists of these films. And so you begin to see people like Woody Strode, Jim Brown, Fred Williamson, and many others starring in Westerns and being the primary focus or the characters that are driving the narrative trajectory. And that was a real sea change or a real shift that happens in the post-World War II era. So there were Black Westerns earlier than 1950, but the genre of black westerns really takes on a more political direction or political trajectory after World War II.
And I hate that. Do you hear me? I'm a man.
If we look at the films in which Jim Brown starred, like Rio Contra and then 100 Rifles, and then we follow his career through to Fred Williamson's career and even Sidney Poitier's directorial debut, Buck and the Preacher, we see that the films begin to turn up the volume on the political content, on the ways in which the black cowboy is demanding and ultimately expecting respect and becomes a leader in these narratives. So he moves from a silent trope, as in, say, John Ford's Sergeant Rutledge, where Woody Strode almost doesn't speak in the film, to becoming active narrative agents. Not only are they agents of action, but they're agents of change. So in Buck and the Preacher, Buck is a seminal figure, a central figure in creating Native American and African American coalition against white supremacy.
Just as mainstream westerns evolved and combined with other genres, so too have black westerns. They have changed in style and form alongside Hollywood films, and they've continued the tradition of presenting African American perspectives on contemporary politics.
You see over time the way black westerns begin to amalgamate, incorporate a range of other genres to reward their loyal fans, the western spectators, by bringing in some of the visual pleasures of other genres and just mixing it up to create something that is recognizable as a western, but still pleasurable in other ways.
I hope all of you have enjoyed it. I hope by word and mouth that you will pass this around, because it's quite a thing for the Americans to know all of this history and not have any of it edited out.
So if anyone is interested in learning more about these films, check out my book, Black Rodeo, A History of the African American Western.